So honestly, what can you say about David Unwin? He's every time everybody listens to a podcast with him or hears a talk, and you can see the comments underneath, and it's always, he's so lovely. I wish he was my doctor. But amazing to listen to, amazingly knowledgeable, and great work, and just, well, David Unwin.
So hello. Who in the audience have not heard me speak before? Wow, great, loads of newbies, that's fabulous. In which case I ought to introduce myself. So I'm a GP from north of Liverpool in Southport, and I've looked after the same population of patients. I think it's 41 years now. The first 25 years was a bit of a waste, I'm sorry to tell you. I did conventional medicine, and mostly when you came in, I was trying to decide which drug to give you, and then I gave you the drug and then you were out, and that was that. And so of course I was adding drug after drug, year after year, and it was really, really depressing. Horrible medicine. And about when I was 55, I was so depressed with myself that I was going to retire. You're going to hear from my very clever wife, Jen. She's a clinical health psychologist, and she said, before you retire, can we not do one cheerful thing? Just one cheerful thing together before you shuffle off and play golf or whatever. The one cheerful thing was changing diet for people with type 2 diabetes. And it's been amazing. It's transformed my life. And we've now got to a situation in the practice where 52% of all of my patients with type 2 diabetes have drug-free remission of their diabetes, not using drugs. Thank you. And when you think, I hadn't seen drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. I hadn't seen it a single time in 25 years of medicine. I saw diabetes as a chronic, deteriorating condition, and I expected patients to inevitably get worse. And that was what was so depressing about medicine. And so that was in 2012. I'm now 66. I never retired. I love being a GP, and they can't get rid of me. But we're not really talking about that so much today, though it will come in towards the end. This is an ancestral health event, and I'm really fascinated by things like Neanderthals. Weirdly fascinated. And so we're thinking about ancestral diets and how that may be relevant or not to modern day man and woman. We're going to touch on what's gone wrong and what we could do right. Each of you should have in front these cards. They're relevant to the talk, and there are QR codes on there, and that's for some free resources that come in later in the talk. So to get to the more of the meat of it, I'm holding one of my most precious possessions. This is a certified, genuine Neanderthal hand axe that I bought. I really love it, and it's 100,000 years old. That makes you think, doesn't it? Makes you think about whoever made it, who held it, what did they use it for, and what did they eat. So we're going to come on to the Neanderthals. I'm fascinated by what happened to them. You know, each of us is somewhere between maybe 2 to 5% Neanderthal, because before they vanished, we interbred with them a bit. Then they vanished. Why did they vanish? Where did they go? So something about the Neanderthals. something about modern man, something about what, if you were keeping a pet human, what would you feed it for that pet human to live the longest time? And what is the species specific diet for keeping your pet human? All my life I've kept animals. I've had loads of pets, and I always read the book on the pet and find out what do you need to feed it so it lives. What's in the book on the human diet? Also relevant to the talk is my passion as a naturalist. So I've been a naturalist a lot longer than I've been a doctor. From a child, I was obsessed with what lived under stones and what you could find in nature. And I have another role. I run 5 bird reserves near Southport. So I'm really fascinated by biodiversity and nature and how brilliant it is. And I've done that since I can remember. And it's relevant to medicine because around the time when I was thinking of retiring, part of the depression was I never saw healthy animals. Do you know what I mean? If you go into nature, stuff's running around and looks healthy. But and to be a naturalist, you have to be very observant, and to be a doctor, I'm very observant. I show each patient into my room, and by the time they've walked down the corridor and sat down, I'm pretty sure whether they're healthy or unhealthy, or lots about them. Are they unhappy? Who they're sitting with in the waiting room. And being observant, humankind just walk down the street, go to a supermarket. It's really depressing because human beings just don't look right. They don't look healthy. And I knew this, but I didn't know why. And I think I do know why now, because I know that in changing diet and all various other things that Phil was talking about in lifestyle medicine, I see amazing transformations in every clinic I do. So you've got the background there. If somebody interested in nature, quite observant and curious, and then thinking about how to improve health. And we've got a Neanderthal hand axe as well. So I'm just going to see if things come up there I need to get rid of. So we'll move on. So the first thing I would say that is nobody's going to argue with. Oh, I would if this worked. No, on. Okay, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Just a moment, I'm frozen. There we are. There we are. So this is to make the point that are we not basically caveman and woman? And there's me, as mainly caveman. Absolutely my own body, isn't it, Jen?
Yes.
Yes, you see, that's me. So really, if you think of the time span about the Neanderthals and what came after, modern man and the way we live now is a tiny blink of the eye. And so because we lived as caveman and woman for so long, basically we've got caveman and cavewoman's gut. We've also got the brain. We are hardwired as caveman and cavewoman. And Jen, as a clinical psychologist, will be talking about some of the how are we hardwired. Because understanding our physiology and understanding our brain is key to caring for ourselves and having the best life. And I worry that as we go further and further away from the way that we were designed to live, I think we're becoming more unhealthy and more unhappy. So this is, I think, worth considering and thinking about. Oh, I forgot the bow tie. There. Caveman with a bow tie. So this is to kind of illustrate that, you know, you've got on one side the rather magnificent caveman, and then on the other side you've got the same man popped into a modern office, and he looks stressed, and there's a clock there, and there's a computer and all the rest of it. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it likely that caveman was, on the whole, healthier and probably more content. You know, we've got an epidemic in the UK at the moment of young people cutting themselves. Huge numbers of young people are using razors to cut themselves to deal with stress. It cannot be right. I never saw that 40 years ago, and now it's so common that you don't get a referral to see a specialist because the specialist will not see a young person who's self-harming with a razor blade because it's so common. Do you see? So where are we going with this? We've got to, this is our young people whose diet is destroyed, but their mental health, they are suffering so much, they're cutting themselves with razor blades. It can't be right. It can't be right. And I just think that's not how it was. It's not how it was. So the question is, that's the same guy, according to AI, who did it for me, as caveman and as a modern office guy. The question is, can we go the other way? Could we start with the modern office guy and turn him into what looks like a caveman? Like that. Can we do that? Can we really transform people? Well, here's one I did earlier. This is like, do you remember Blue Peter when they'd show you a long time ago, one earlier? So this is a guy who's given his permission for me to share his story. He's called Josh. He weighs somewhere over 25 stone at this point, and he's just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Consider Josh's life. Look at him. Everything for Josh is hard. Everything is difficult, and it's very problematic for him to be proud of himself. Every part of his life is difficult, and I'm going to tell him that he's got type 2 diabetes as well, which could be really bad news, couldn't it? That could be just one last straw for a young man struggling. And he came to see me, I'll have to look, I can't remember. Yeah, it was March 2024. And then that same year, he'd lost 62 kilos in weight by December. Roll of drums, wait for it, and there. Now, look at Josh. Notice his eyes, they're shining. Notice his skin, it's shining. Is he happy? Yes. Is he running 10Ks? Yes. Has he got a young man's life with all that it should be? Yes. You've got to be interested to know how he did it. What's really interesting is some detail about this. So I had a 10-minute appointment with him, and he was just going to Mexico for 3 months. And the sugariness of his blood was very high. So as a doctor, I was really concerned because I thought, oh my God, he's going to Mexico. He can die while he's there, and I will feel responsible. What can I do in 10 minutes? And he said, you know, I said, you're not really safe to travel. And he said, well, I'm going because I paid, and the plane goes in 3 days. What can you do? The first and most important thing is hope. Don't tell him he's going to die, because he won't listen. But tell him, you've got some problems, you're diabetic, but I think I know something that could really help. I'd love to work with you. You could be so transformed. He's really interested in that. And then the next thing was, I prescribed a continuous glucose monitor for him. I'm wearing one now. It's on my arm, there. Because I have diabetes, so I need to know my blood sugar. So this is a monitor which gives me 24/7 immediate information on my blood sugar. And I did a terrible thing because I prescribed one for Josh against the guidelines. Ooh, how naughty. They're not supposed to have those unless they're on insulin. So I'm supposed to wait until you're on insulin and ill and sick, and then I can give you the continuous glucose monitor. Or shall we give Josh one right now? So I told Josh, listen, diabetes, you need to avoid a high blood sugar because it'll make you sick. It's aging your arteries and you're in danger. Here's a diet sheet, which I have here. And the QR code, this is the diet sheet Josh left for South America with. And I didn't have much time for any more because it's a 10-minute appointment. But I also gave him my teaspoon of sugar equivalent chart, which you've also got. And we'll come back to those later because I just want to make this relevant and you to realise how it can help modern man. So Josh went off, and when he came back, his diabetes was in remission. He'd learnt and taught himself what not to eat using the monitor and the diet sheet. That's all he had. Wow. And that's why I love medicine. I love it because I became a doctor to make a difference. And that is making a difference. That's like being a wizard or something. It's a fabulous job to have. And Josh and I, we get on so well, and he gives me a hug because it's all going so well, and his family come because they're so happy, because his life before was so miserable. So we're going to come back to that, but we haven't nearly finished with the Neanderthals. So here's the thing. If I'm telling you to be interested in an ancestral diet, well, it's a bit worrying because the average life expectancy of caveman was 35 years. So how can I stand here as a healthcare professional and advise you to take on a diet that gives or delivered historically an average life expectancy of 35 years? And in fact, that's often what our detractors stand up and say. They say, well, oh yes, how long did caveman live? About 35 years. But if we dig down, there's some really interesting detail. So this is a graph of what happens to cavemen and when they die. And of course, without antibiotics and modern plumbing, the childhood mortality was sky high, really high, 200 times the childhood mortality that we have now. And if you know anything about an average, something like all these children dying skews the average. If we just move on to the next slide, there are references, if you can read them at the bottom. What this shows is that if you discount, if you were a cave boy or girl and you got to about 12 years old, and then your immune system is mature and you're not likely to die of infection, the average survival was something like 70. Do you see? So even though they didn't have central heating and they didn't have plumbing and antibiotics, cavemen and women who survived childhood had quite long lives. And so it's very interesting to wonder what you could achieve if we had the wisdom of the cavemen and some of the technology and plumbing and antibiotics of modern man. How long could we live? It would be interesting, wouldn't it? But let's not rubbish the cavemen, because they did really well to live to 60 or 70 in ancient times. You know, how on earth did they get through the winter? That kind of thing. I now want to introduce a friend of mine who's taught me so much of the paleo stuff. I'm so lucky in that we went to a low carb conference in Tel Aviv, and then, you know, at a dinner it's always Russian roulette who you sit next to, isn't it? Because it's all evening and it could be really bad. Or it could be really good. But this night it was really good because I sat next to this guy, and he is an academic who's spent his entire life, Mickey Ben-Dor is his name, his entire life researching exactly what did caveman and cavewoman eat. So what he knows was fascinating to me and really relevant to today. And a lot of the slides and a lot of the papers that I'm using, he has written himself. And Mickey Ben-Dor has written a book, I'll show you later. He knows stuff, dead clever, and we'll explore some of what he knows. So this is just a cave painting. And oh, right, thank you. I'm going to read his quote. Does this come off? Right. Yeah. Oh, this is going to work better. Yeah. So this is Mickey's quote. "We are not claiming that humankind caused the extinction of the megafauna in the last 150,000 years. We're claiming that we humans played a key role by persistently hunting giant species into decline, thereby rendering them vulnerable to extinction." So he's fascinated by what happened to the woolly rhinos, what happened to the giant kangaroos, what happened to there was even bigger elephants then. The elephants were bigger. So again, so what he said was, wherever mankind appeared, there was an extinction. In America, in Australia, in islands like New Zealand. Wherever we reached, extinction followed. Giant sloth, mammoth, giant kangaroo, the woolly rhinoceros, all in the last 10 or 15,000 years. So this is another interesting question, is why did all these enormous animals die out? And that's much debated. Oh, my goodness, we're having a lot of... No? Off. Turn it off and on again. Ah, now it's going to do it, I just feel. No. What I'm going to do is turn it off and on again. So we just mustn't forget the rhinos and all the rest of it. Ah. Oh well, I don't know why that worked, but it did. I'm bringing you now to one of the things that fascinates me about the Neanderthal that made my hand axe. Neanderthals had bigger brains than us, significantly bigger brains than us. Also, they were significantly more muscular than us. Isn't that interesting? What would we do? What could we do if we had a bigger brain? What could they do that we can't do? It's really intriguing. But it makes it really intriguing. Why did they die out? Why did they succumb and we didn't? And we had smaller brains and we were less muscular. And it's very odd because actually we ate a lot of the Neanderthals. So how on earth did we get to eat the Neanderthals when they were stronger than us and cleverer than us? So we just want to consider for a minute brain size. Brain size also matters in terms of diet, because your brain is the most metabolically active organ you've got, and it's greedy for fuel and greedy for nutrients. So one of the problems for humans with having a big brain is in terms, it's difficult because you've got to feed it through the winter. So there are advantages to a smaller brain and yet big brains. So the Neanderthals had the biggest brains of all, and this had an effect on their diet. So that's a comparison now, and you can see that the Neanderthal's brain was between 1400 and 1750 cubic millimeters. The average brain of early man was 1300 to 1500. But that's not the end of the story, because actually the people in this room, me and you, our brains are about 10% smaller than our modern Homo sapiens ancestors as cavemen had. So brain size has declined. So the Neanderthals had the biggest, then it went early Homo sapiens, early modern man, and now you've got modern man itself. The brain has got smaller. That must be important. It must mean something. If we come to, this is looking at primates but also various species of human. And you can see that through time, so chimpanzees, we're looking at whether they ate a vegetarian meal or whether they ate a basically meat diet. And what actually happened, so chimpanzees eat, and gorillas eat mainly shoots and leaves. That's why they have the enormous tummy to digest all this vegetable matter. But then as you go on to the various species, we were eating more and more meat. And part of the reason for this, what was it about the meat? Well, Mickey Bendor would say the most important part of the meat was the fat, because your brain is actually made of fat, made of cholesterol, actually. It's mainly fat. And one of the things that the ancient men treasured was fat. The Neanderthals had like fat rendering factories where they were smashing mammoth bones to get the fat out because it was so valuable. Some of you may have heard of the work of the wonderful Stephenson in 1903, an Icelandic anthropologist who went to live with the Inuits and was astonished that the Inuits didn't have cancer, they didn't have dental decay, and they didn't have vitamin C. And he went on the Inuit diet, and compared to the shipmates that were having ship's biscuits that died of scurvy, he was incredibly healthy just on meat. But what he noticed was the Inuits gave the lean meat to their dogs, but they felt they needed the fat. And it may be that ancient man was the same, that the rhino, if you want loads of fat, why don't you just chase a fat herbivore? That would be logical, wouldn't it? That would be logical. And so Mickey Bendor's work is, well, if you look carefully at it, the extinctions followed the Neanderthals and then the early humans around as they ate them out. So part of Mickey Ben-Dor's work, how do we know that he's telling us the truth? So apparently one of the best ways to find out what something ate millennia ago are nitrogen isotope 15 measurements, because that absolutely gives a fingerprint of what did that animal eat. And Mickey's research on this showed that basically ancient humans were about the same as wolves. So wolves at the time were eating 70% or more meat, and humans at the time were eating 70% or more meat on average. He also spent years scraping the ancient tartar off cavemen's and women's teeth. Isn't that amazing? Loads of different ways he found to back up his research, and he's written some wonderful papers on it. But we haven't really thought about what happened to those Neanderthals. Where are they now? Why are we here and not a room full of Neanderthals who are brighter than me in any case? So, and it's to do really interesting work of Mickey's. So what you've got here is 3 graphs. The first one is the early Stone Age, the middle Stone Age, and the later Stone Age. And the graphs are showing what kind of animals did they find bones, what was being killed and eaten in those 3 times. So the early Stone Age, the average weight of the prey was 3 tons. The average prey weighed 3 tons. So these were the mammoths, the woolly rhinos. These were big things. But then in the middle Stone Age, the weight of the average prey was coming down. And then by the time you got to the late Stone Age, which would be about 5,000 years ago, the average weight of the prey had come down from 3 tons to 50 kilos. So what's going on? And what happened? What happened to the Neanderthals? Well, if you think, if I weighed quite a lot more and I was more muscly, how fast could I run? And Mickey Ben-Dor and colleagues have calculated how fast Neanderthals could run. And they couldn't run as fast as us because they were heavy and muscly. So that was a bit of a problem, but the fat herbivores couldn't run very fast. So we actually also worked out how fast can a woolly rhino run, or, all these things. And in fact, they couldn't run that fast. So it's slowish men pursuing slowish animals. But there was another problem. I've got another Neanderthal tool here. So you saw the first one, which was the classic Neanderthal hand axe there. The Neanderthals struggled. They weren't as adaptable as us. So the standard hand axe was mainly what they had for maybe 100,000 years. And it had some downsides. You have to get very close to the animal to kill it with a hand axe. That's a real disadvantage. Also, if you break a hand axe, you've got to make another one. But what if you've moved away from supplies of stone that make hand axes? So you have to cart round with you lots of raw materials. So these hand axes were great and they used them for everything, but what a lot of disadvantages. It took them 200,000 years to come up with this. They started breaking up the cores, flint cores, into smaller tools. and they could resharpen them. So this actually is adapted to scrape the flesh off bones. It's still a Neanderthal hand axe, but they were very slow. This is 40,000 years old. So in all that time, they were using possibly spears, but they didn't throw things, we don't think. They used spears to kill you, stab you to death, at least you were a couple of meters away. But none of these tools are really great for killing birds or hares or fast-moving prey. And what we could do, even with our smaller brains, is we were the first ones that came up with things like arrows and javelins you could throw. And so we could kill smaller prey. So it is thought that all these big fat herbivores were dying out, either because we'd eaten them or for whatever reason, but the Neanderthals were just running out of food. And there's one final fascinating thing about Neanderthals and modern man. Neanderthals, we don't know why, but they never learned to cooperate in large groups. 50 was about their maximum. Maybe it was language. There are other things about them. It's thought they couldn't conceptualize very well, so they couldn't cooperate. They never got into art, for instance. They never made jewelry, even with their bigger brain. But humans, Homo sapiens, we could cooperate in massive bands, hundreds of us together. And this combined, the lack of the food supply and the greater adaptability of modern caveman was probably what put pay to the Neanderthals. But how interesting. But we actually interbred with them before we ate them, before they went. So the Neanderthals are leaving the story now. So, where are we now? So we're beginning to think cavemen knew stuff, and they're eating whatever, and they live to be about 70. What's happening now? Well, what's happening now is many, many pandemics. I'm seeing pandemics of obesity. I'm seeing pandemics of diabetes. I'm seeing dementia, arthritis, inflammation. The population I care for has changed in 40 years. So 40 years ago, there weren't people under 60 with walking sticks. That's really common now. There weren't young people with type 2 diabetes. There weren't people, I have lots of patients who are so heavy they can't walk, and they're on the scooter things. There are now 3 shops in Southport to sell scooters for people who struggle with mobility. We didn't need that in Southport 40 years ago. So where we are, according to the World Health Organization, we are overfed but undernourished. Think about that. So yes, we're eating loads of food to become overweight, but the quality is so poor, we're undernourished. And that's come from the World Health Organization. Oh. So, how did this happen? How have we, in the last 50, 100 years, how have we allowed these terrible epidemics? And how have we not noticed? And why are we not doing something about it? I think there are three problems. I think junk food, ultra-processed food, is a real problem for various reasons that we'll discuss. As Jen is, I'm sure, going to tell us, when intelligent people do stupid stuff, think about it. Isn't that like drinking or drugs or smoking? Intelligent people eating food they know will make them ill. What could be the explanation? Is it not addiction? Jen has some good evidence to say it is, and she's going to give you a full session on that, because in my clinic I am fighting junk food addiction every week after week. People who've done well and then slip back. I used to call it carb creep, but that is trivializing something that later on can kill you. It's not trivial. It's sad and it's worrying, and I think it is addiction. Over to you later, Jen. Another problem is food. The food we buy is less nourishing than it was, and I'm going to explain why. So our children. It's possible now that 2/3 of their diet isn't proper food. It's junk food, it's amusement, it's entertainment. It's not nourishment. And I think this is probably true when I talk to children and I ask what they eat, and you find out what's going on in schools. We're rewarding children with buns and chocolate. They've done well. Have a chocolate bar. It's Christmas chocolate. It's Easter chocolate. It's Mother's Day chocolate, Father's Day. It's one long excuse for junk food. But I think what's most insidious is the idea that we might reward children, because then we're screwing with their brains, aren't we? It's like Pavlovian dogs. That Christmas, what does Christmas mean? It means eating all this stuff. So junk food and children, really, really worrying. Now we come to, but does it matter? So I'm telling you this, but what's my evidence? Where's the research into junk food? So I've got lots and lots of research on this, but here's an example. So analysis was conducted on 22,400 men and women in Italy for over 8 years. They looked at what ultra-processed food they were consuming according to the NOVA classification, which is how we now classifying how processed is food. Individuals reporting the highest intake of ultra-processed food, as opposed to the lowest, experienced a 58% increased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality. And this is the worst thing, and a 26% increase in all-cause mortality. Because the idea of worrying about what kills you comes with another thing. So it makes no point if I worry about heart disease and avoid it to die of cancer because of something I just did. We should be very interested in all-cause mortality. So eating something that's associated with such a dramatic increase in all-cause mortality, given all we've observed in our lives, does it make sense? Yes, it does make sense. What's interesting is they also drill down, and what is it about ultra-processed food? Is it the processing? Is it the saturated fat? Is it the salt? Is it the sugar? They thought that 36% of it at least was due to the sugar. I'm very anti-sugar. I see sugar as empty calories, pointless, and addictive, and rots your teeth. So my family laugh at me because I go around telling you sugar is certain death. And it may be, and it may be. This is an interesting thing. This is information from the Labour Party, government figures. And it's about, people often say to me about the cost of eating healthy food. Yes, but it's expensive. This idea of cost needs to be broadened, because when you're thinking about an action, the cost isn't just financial. What about health? What about quality of life? But here's another thought of cost to the government. So when you look at the cost of junk food, 92 billion covers the direct costs through the health service of diabetic drugs, of blood pressure, all of these things. But 176 billion is the cost of the lost productivity, all those sick people not earning a living and not paying taxes. And so the sums are, every taxpayer in the UK pays an extra £7,000 in tax because of the junk food the population is eating. And there's a refinement. What we've got here is we've got a system that privatizes the profits. Who makes the profit from the junk food? It's the junk food companies and the shops. But the government and taxpayers and us individually pick up the cost. So we're allowing the junk food manufacturers and the supermarkets to sell us stuff that's costing us £7,000 per year in tax, quite apart from all the misery and unhappiness. It's a crazy, crazy system. Maybe junk food should be taxed like cigarettes, which are properly taxed and representing the suffering. That you have the choice to smoke if you wish. I believe in free choice, but do the food manufacturers and the supermarkets have the right to ruin the NHS? Doctors everywhere are utterly exhausted. Why are they haven't the energy to do anything? Because we've had a 10-fold increase in diabetes. Most doctors are exhausted. Our health service is crippled by demand that we're struggling to meet, generated by the food system. And it's not just physical health, it's mental health. So these graphs are looking at the consumption of ultra-processed food and mental well-being. So the one on the left is how distressed people become with increasing amounts of junk food. And the association is that they tend to be much more distressed individuals. The one on the right is looking at how coping people are. How do they cope with life against the consumption of junk food? And again, you can see the association is that the more junk food you eat, you seem to cope less. And certainly, in practice, what patients find that give up sugar and junk food is they're more cheerful. They just are more cheerful. And I bet most of you in this audience have noticed mental improvements from your diet. And I know if I cheat, I become miserable and anxious. So junk food, very, very expensive. I've touched on this already. Jen will be doing loads. There is Jen in the Daily Mail doing exclusive. She got the front, I can show off. She hates showing off. There she is, the front page of the Express last year. And I think you're getting a thing in the Express this weekend, aren't you, Jen?
Yes.
Good news. She's done TV, radio, loads. Dead clever woman. Hope. This is from 17th of July in the Grocer. 19 million UK adults ditch ultra-processed food as healthy as grow. Hooray! Hooray! At last, we're saying the word junk food so often and ultra-processed food that people throughout the UK are beginning to look at how many ingredients are in food and they're shopping differently. And if it's in the grocer, they'll take notice. So that's a bit of hope. I also told you that the food supply is less nourishing than it was. And this is because, I'm going to show you some evidence in a minute, but because of modern farming practices, if you just use nitrogen fertilizer to grow crops year after year and you harvest the crops, but you don't put anything back in, the soil is deteriorating. Our soil is deteriorating, so what we grow in it is less nourishing than it was. So, the average mineral content, being calcium, magnesium and iron in cabbage, lettuce, tomatoes and spinach, has dropped by 80% since 1914. That's astonishing, And it shows it's getting harder and harder to be well nourished because the green veg doesn't contain what it did. And that explains that, you know, the meal you ate 50 years ago isn't the same as today. The lettuce is not the same. And there is other work on this. So this brings me full circle back to nutrient density. The idea that if you are going to eat, maximizing nutrient density in that food is really important because of this. Because you want to be nourished but not overfed. And this is my favorite slide on nutrient density. This is the work of Ty Beale in New York. And he was looking at the nutrient demands for an average woman aged between the age of 15 and 49. What is she going to have to eat to supply a third of her daily needs for vitamin A, folate, vitamin B12, calcium iron, and zinc? And you've got some choices. Ladies, you have choices. You could have, there it is, 4 kilos of refined grains 3 times a day. Is that attractive? Can you imagine yourself in front of 4 kilos? And of course, you're going to be fat, aren't you? Or you can have a teaspoon and 2/3 of liver. Do you see the difference between nutrient density? Liver, you only need 7 grams. Or you can have 4 kilos, or if you read in between, yes, green veg is good, actually. Green veg is good, but not as good as liver. Eggs, the things at the top are what you want to aim for, which are actually animal source foods and dark green leafy veg, which is what's on my diet sheet. A nutrient-dense diet. Another thing of hope, we're coming now to the end of the talk where I'm talking more about diabetes and more about what I actually do. And I'd like you to understand things like insulin and physiology, because then you could better understand your own diets and individualize it, because our optimal diet is not the same. So this is another one of my volunteers. And she presents there on the left as a very heavy lady with incredibly poor controlled type 2 diabetes and a young child. You'll notice she's feeding the young child a banana. That wouldn't happen now. And again, she now is 92 pounds lighter and her diabetes is in remission. Look at that. And actually, there's 15 years between those two and she looks a lot better now. In the 15 years, she was on loads of drugs. She had a very, very difficult job. She was a nurse, and she never thought about nutrition, and she never thought about the things that I taught her about 18 months ago and that I'm going to teach you now. We're going to begin with insulin. Insulin is a vital hormone, and it's vital because it controls a very dangerous substance, blood sugar. A high blood sugar will kill you, and quite fast. You end up in a coma and you're in hospital. A low blood sugar can kill you quite fast as well. You end up in a coma and you go into hospital. So in between going into hospital with the low and the high is a sweet spot, a narrow margin of the perfect blood sugar control. And insulin achieves that for us. It's amazing. So if I eat a bowl of cornflakes full of sugar, or biscuits or rice, my blood sugar goes up, insulin slams in and gets rid of that sugar out of the bloodstream. But the question is, what does insulin do with that sugar? It still exists. Insulin, I'll just get rid of that. Insulin is pushing sugar inside cells where it can do less damage. So it's a very reasonable response to a sugary meal to push it inside the cell to do less damage. But what happens to the sugar in the cell? Well, it gets turned into fat. So you see, this is the link between sugar and fat. And a particular fat is triglyceride, which we're going to talk about, which is on the fasting lipid profile. So what we've got here is, yes, you need sugar maybe to run around, but what if you eat more sugar than you need to run around? Well, you end up with a big tummy, because that sugar builds up as fat, particularly in the central organs, central obesity, but you also end up with fat in your liver and in your pancreas. So, in terms of insulin production, it's been said we're eating in a perpetual autumn. So you see, we were meant, insulin is really important. We were all meant to put on weight in August, September and October because winter was coming and you needed that fat to get through the winter. You need to eat those berries while they're there. You're hardwired to eat those berries and get fat. But the problem is now we're all eating in a perpetual autumn of plenty and winter never comes. And year on year, you're getting bigger and bigger. Insulin also makes you hungry, makes you go for those strawberries, those raspberries, that honey. It makes you hungry. So it's great for caveman. He needed that insulin. And the fat ones, they lived. Like Jen. They lived. They got through the winter. That was vital for reproduction. The successful women were worshipped almost. There are, in the British Museum, models of women who never existed, but they had their fantasy woman was massively fat because that was a great wife to have, because she wouldn't need to eat much through the winter and she'd give birth in the spring and all the rest of it. Anyway, insulin. Right, so there's the model. I'm developing it. Patience with me, patience. So there's me eating, what am I eating? Doritos. I was eating lemon meringue pie. I'll have a whole one and then I'll eat a second. I've done that. And then Jaffa cakes. And patients are bringing me ginger snaps because they know the doctor likes biscuits. So bring him loads of biscuits. And I gradually ate and ate until my liver is full of fat. 30% of the entire world has fatty liver disease. 30% of everybody you know has fatty liver disease, and doctors are not talking about it because they don't know what to do about it. But it's really serious because your liver is there for a reason and it doesn't work as well. But in particular, fatty liver interferes with the work of insulin. So your insulin doesn't work as well and you become insulin resistant. So that means you're struggling to compensate for the Mars bar. So what's the answer? Produce more insulin. If it doesn't work as well, rev the insulin production. So you become hyperinsulinemic to compensate for the insulin resistance. But then there's another problem because as you know, I carry on and the cornflakes, I'm filling my pancreas with fat as well. So that eventually the system collapses and you lose regulation of blood sugar, which happened to me, and at that point you have type 2 diabetes, but it's both. It's insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, and then you lose homeostasis and you can't regulate blood sugar. But there is a 10-year silent scream from the liver first. And we know abnormal liver function, we know triglycerides rise, and what do? Absolutely nothing. We wait until you've got type 2 diabetes and then give you metformin. Genius, absolutely genius. Right, so what I'm doing with the patients you've seen and hundreds of others, high blood sugar. Right, that's your problem, because sugary blood over time ages your arteries. In fact, a high blood sugar is doing damage within 6 hours. Because the non-stick lining of your arteries, the glycocalyx, is attacked by sugar, unfortunately. So, as I have diabetes, people with diabetes need to avoid a high blood sugar. So the first question In fact, it isn't the first question. The first thing is try and see it as a puzzle, not a problem. So when you're dealing with clients or family members, if you tell them they're a problem and what you need to do is, it doesn't go down well. And it doesn't go down well with patients if I'm saying you're a problem. So try and see it as a puzzle that we will look at together, a collaborative thing. This is an interesting thing. If you can reframe problems as puzzles and then they don't seem as threatening. Usually a high blood sugar is something you ate. Nearly always. Time after time after time, I'm seeing people and their blood sugar is high because of what they ate. So it's worth asking, you've gone very sugary, the hemoglobin A1C, the average sugar in us is high. What do you think's doing it? For 25 years, I missed the most important component of what you eat that puts up blood sugar. And it was a patient who pointed this error out to me very forcibly one afternoon because she wondered if I was medically qualified. Because she'd noticed that in 10 years, I had never once mentioned bread as a source of blood sugar, or pasta or potato. And she said to me, Dr. Unwin, it's not really even your medical qualifications, because really a schoolboy biology should have taught you that starch is sugar. And that's the first lady that achieved type 2 diabetes remission in my practice, a very scary woman who I owe a great deal to. Instead of the complaint, she taught me how she did it, and that's why I'm here today. Anyway, so starch is sugar. There it is. So this is what you've got on the table, and it's looking at the glycemic load of different foods. So if you eat a small bowl, 150 grams of boiled rice, that's equivalent to 10 teaspoons of sugar. 10. Potato, you know, I was telling everybody, have a baked potato. Dear God, isn't that awful? 9 teaspoons of sugar, and so on and so forth. Now, those infographics also point out there are foods that you can eat that don't put up blood sugar. That's one of 7 infographics. They're translated into 35 languages. They're not copyrighted. They've been downloaded millions of times around the world. And the QR code takes you directly to the whole bunch of them. And steal them, use them. So based on that, this is the diet sheet that my patients use. And the other QR code you've got on the other side of your handout, the page that's got yellow on it and a little dot of red, is the QR code to take you directly to the low-carb diet that's achieving 52% remission for our patients with diabetes, significant improvements in blood pressure and many other things. So in this diet, I was telling people, turn the white stuff green. So have your steak. We all agree with that, or most of us. But instead of the chips, why don't you have a load of green veg? Have your curry, enjoy it. But instead of the rice, why don't you have a load of green veg? But I was also saying, don't be scared of animal fat. It's fine to have double cream. It's fine to use butter. It's fine to eat loads of eggs. But that began a problem. Because at that time, bear in mind this is 2013, there were plenty of doctors, and there still are, who really think eggs are a problem, who really think that double cream is certain death, because we all know it's building up the fat in your arteries and so on and so forth. So I got into a load of bother. And in fact, there were meetings like this for doctors that I'd be invited, and I would be heckled by colleagues, actually really shouted at, that what I was doing was irresponsible, that my patients would die, and not to mention the vitamin deficiencies that obviously were going to occur. But they did me a favour, because I started collecting really carefully baseline data and latest follow-up, and that's the basis of the 30 peer-reviewed papers I've now published, because I know what happens to my patients at Norwood Avenue in every way that I possibly can. So here's the result. What you're looking at here is this was published about 2 years ago. And at that point, the average duration of a low-carb diet was 33 months. And this is a cohort, 186 patients who've consented to share their data. And you're looking at each thing that I measure, baseline on the left, the darker shade, and then latest follow-up. So average, we're looking at every single marker of cardiovascular risk for my patients over years. So weight decreases by 12% on average. But that's on average. I mean, the greatest weight loss we've had is 10 or 12 stone. You know, I've got people I couldn't weigh at the beginning, so we'll never know what they weighed. Their initial goal was to be weighable. So it's astonishing what you can achieve. The hemoglobin A1C is the sugariness of the diet, which is really related to mortality. That improves by about 30%. The triglyceride is a really important marker of heart disease. That improves by 35% on average. I can't tell you, if you use statins, we're not talking 35% improvement. Nothing like that. Things like 5%, if you're lucky. Blood pressure. Insulin causes your kidneys to hoard salt. This is really important. So if you're high carb, you're high insulin, or if you're hyperinsulinemic, your kidneys are working overtime to hoard salt and water. And that's why I had high blood pressure as a younger man, but not now. Because when you go low carb, you wee out the salt and the water. It's also why if you go carnivore, many of you will find you have to have more salt. Actually, put your hands up. Who has discovered they need more salt in their diet? There you go. This is a physiological reality, that if you don't have enough salt, you'll get muscle cramps, you'll get headaches, you don't feel energetic. You do need more salt because of your insulin is no longer very effective, and so you're weeing out the salt naturally, because otherwise, if you lived at the seaside as cave woman or man, you'd have died, wouldn't you, if you couldn't get rid of the salt, if you were eating mussels all day long. So God designed you perfectly to get rid of salt, but he never anticipated the high carbohydrate, high insulin environment we live in now. Cholesterol does actually come down. So whether I actually don't think I'm not really that much of a believer in the whole cholesterol thing, but in any case, it improves on average on a low-carb diet, so I don't really care. Cholesterol HDL ratio does matter a bit more, and that improves significantly. So what we're seeing here is real-life evidence, real-world evidence in the British National Health Service that you can improve every single marker for cardiovascular risk. And some of those are markers for cancer too. So this is really important, and I'm grateful now for the guys that stood up and heckled me, because it made me want to be safe, and when I got the results, I couldn't believe them. And every 10% improvement in hemoglobin A1C is associated with a 45% lower risk of retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy. Only I haven't done a 10% improvement in hemoglobin A1C, I've done a nearly 30% improvement. So, why isn't every doctor doing this? Because it's magic. There are reasons. It's simple, but it's not easy, I think Jen would say. Moving on. Oh yeah, triglycerides. Please don't forget triglyceride. It's a lot more important than cholesterol. And there's the reference for it. Triglyceride HDL ratio is a much better predictor of cardiovascular risk. So if you're going to have your cholesterol done, ask for a fasting lipid profile, because you'll learn a lot more. Another problem we've got, so the story was, I was lecturing people to only have 2 eggs a week. Do you remember that? Oh, cut back on the butter, have 2 eggs, consider don't having the yolks. That was so pathetic. This was from the year 2000 onwards I was doing this. But what I noticed was it didn't actually improve lipid profiles. And then in 2016, it was discovered there is no link at all between dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol. So you can actually eat as many eggs as you like. Dietary cholesterol is irrelevant to serum cholesterol, even if serum cholesterol matters. So that left the drug companies with a problem because they'd set everything up to say cholesterol was the important thing. So they had to be nimble, and they stopped talking about cholesterol altogether, and now they talk about saturated fat, don't they? Only nobody noticed as they segued across. So now saturated fat is the problem for us all. And now they've got the evidence, by the way, on dairy has gone very soft. Full-fat dairy might improve cardiovascular risk. So they've really honed in on meat as a risk and saturated fat as a risk. Because they had to do that because they've got a massive industry dependent on it. So they had to, that machinery, that train had to keep running. So this is a study. We're now looking about, okay, so it's now about saturated fat. From Frontiers in Nutrition, they were looking at data on the American diet from 1800 to 2019. So during that time, processed and ultra-processed foods increased from less than 5% to more than 60% of foods. There were large increases for sugar, white and whole wheat flour, rice, poultry, eggs, vegetable oils and dairy products, and fresh vegetables. But saturated fat from animal sources has declined all that time. So it's very curious that we've noticed massive, my tenfold increase in diabetes, but also all of the non-communicable diseases are rapidly increasing, and we're blaming saturated fat when we have a lot less of that. And it's difficult to believe that foods like, let's say, beef or whatever, it's difficult to believe that these foods we've eaten for so long are actually killing us. I think it's easier to believe that something new has come in that's killing us. That would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? Something new, or something increasing, like the sugar, like the ultra-processed foods. There are many, many more studies on saturated fat and meat. Maybe if I come back, I can share some of those with you. We're near the end. I wanted to give you a little surprise, a little present to take away. So we're playing with AI, and I'm interested in what is the respiratory quotient. You may not, some of you, some dead clever people, I bet loads of you actually know all about the respiratory quotient, but some of you may not. So AI, the respiratory quotient is a measure of the ratio of carbon dioxide produced to oxygen consumed as we burn food. Okay? So we're looking at how much oxygen do I need to breathe in, to how much carbon dioxide am I going to breathe out. And the interesting point that is not generally known is the food you eat, it varies how much carbon dioxide you produce. So, carbohydrate, and you're thinking this is a ratio. So 1 is the ratio if you're on eating carbohydrates. So if I eat carbohydrates, my ratio is 1. If I just eat fat, my ratio is 0.7. So what that means is, if I'm on a keto diet, I'm producing 30% less carbon dioxide every day. Wow. Now, and isn't that an interesting thought when the whole meat eating thing's continually being lambasted as against the planet? So let's develop this a little. Bearing in mind the respiratory quotient, I suspect a human on a very low carb or keto diet might produce up to 30% less carbon dioxide. If I am correct, what would that add up to in terms of kilograms of carbon dioxide per year? So this is me questioning ChatGPT. You don't have to read all that, but the point is every single one of us, so most of you seem to be keto. or low carb. Every single one of you is producing 120 kilos of carbon dioxide less per year. Let's develop it a little bit more. Bearing in mind the 120 kilos of carbon dioxide saved per year, what would be the equivalent area of mature woodland represented by each keto dieter? So, ladies and gentlemen, my gift to you is that each of you is equivalent to nearly an acre of mature woodland just by eating what you eat and breathing. Isn't that amazing? So it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. And the whole carbon footprint thing is far more complicated. And I haven't time now. But you could try that on people who say your diet is not sustainable or whatever. Just memorize 120 kilos of carbon dioxide per year, 0.88 acres of mature woodland for each of you. Now we're just coming to a couple of interesting take-home facts before I stop, because you've suffered long enough in the heat. These are some brilliant books. If you are interested in Neanderthals, you can come and talk to me, and you can hold my Neanderthal hand axe if you want. That book, Kindred, is so interesting. I loved it. I've learnt a lot from the Weston Price Foundation about diet and teeth, diet and immunity, diet and the development of your jaw. And I'd recommend that book, the Weston Price book. It's amazing. It's really good. And my friend Mickey Bendour has written a book, and all of this and far more, all of the adaptations to eating meat are all discussed in that small book. I'd really recommend it. Some free stuff. My work has been turned into an app, the Freshwell app, free on your phones, and it's accredited for use within the National Health Service. So any of you who work in the National Health Service can recommend the Freshwell low carb app as NHS education for type 2 diabetes. It's Kismet approved, and here it's a QR code. It also helps you if you're worried about budgeting, eating low carb on a budget. It's an amazing website, and they did it all for free. Amazing. Conclusions. I think it is possible to approximate to an ancestral diet. We can only, the world has gone. I like the quote, which is we're adapted, all of us are adapted to a world that no longer exists. It's gone, that world, and we're struggling. We're doing our best to recreate something that fits in with our physiology and our mental hardwiring. And we can do a fairly good job. And most of you in this room look like you're doing a fairly good job. Such a diet, though, does need to be nutrient dense. Do remember that dietary carbs stimulate insulin production and fat storage. Useful to use insulin if you've lost loads of weight or whatever, but that's what it does. It promotes fat storage. A modified ancestral diet can have really significant health benefits. Yeah, don't eat food that puts your blood sugar up unless you need to gain weight. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been very patient and very hot. I enjoyed myself, though. Thank you. Thank you. I'll hang around. I'll take questions. I don't know what happens now. Where's the boss?
Oh, there's no boss.
Not a boss. Right, anybody got a question? You can leave the room if you're too hot. Somebody's bound to want to ask something. The lady, shout it. Yes. So I'll repeat the questions. What do I think about olive oil? Okay, I do use it. I think it's probably okay. I wouldn't cook with it because that smoke thing, and I do use it, and I don't particularly have a problem with it. I'm not against it. I think, as was told earlier, what diet is right for you will depend on your own health. So my problem is type 2 diabetes. So olive oil didn't do anything to that, and I'm okay. Apart from, it's less stable, so I wouldn't cook with it because then it's denaturing, and when it's smoking, it's a worry. So a good question. There was another hand up. Shout it out. Fabulous question. What do we all think about the fat jabs, the GLP-1? It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Right. The fundamental question for me is always, why are people unwell? So we should be asking, you know, what's the fundamental problem that you're going to use the GLP-1 jab for? And does that jab sort the problem? On the whole, it does sort out cravings and it does sort out appetite. And some people do lose weight. But the question is, if you're going to do it, don't just eat less of a crap diet, because that's even less nutrient density. And also, if you are going to use it, it's an opportunity to learn to live differently. Because I've real concerns, there's good evidence. Number one, probably muscle loss. Patients are losing muscle loss. Also, we've had 82 deaths in the UK now, published in the British Medical Journal, from the use of GLP-1 injections. So people shouldn't believe that it's completely safe. I've had a patient in intensive care for weeks, but I haven't had the same problem with low carb or keto. So, and my final point on this is low carb. So GLP-1 is a hormone. These drugs are, they're manufactured to be like a hormone we produce already in our gut in response to a meal. It's satiety hormone, GLP-1. The jabs are long-lasting satiety, so you jab yourself once a week. But a low-carb diet has been proven to increase natural GLP-1 production. And so this is why many of us discover when you're low-carb, you're less hungry. There's other reasons as well. So GLP-1, if you must, but you need help, you need nutritional help to support you, please try low-carb first. And people with type 2 diabetes may have to use GLP-1s for other reasons. So but I've got a full hour-long lecture on that. Yes, gentleman at the front, a doctor, I know.
What do you get your grandchildren for Easter?
Ha-ha. Grandchildren. Yeah. So we're very lucky. So we fought this out in our family. When Jen and I started, none of our 3 children were low carb. Gradually, they're all low carb. And we won them over. It's a much longer story how we did that. Subtlety and sneakery, and Jen's a psychologist, so you never win against Anna Cook. She's a psychologist and a damn good cook. But actually, we have 8 grandchildren, and they're all low carb. All of them. And they have amazing dental arches because they've been low carb. Certainly 4 of them were low carb from... No, 6 of them were low carb from birth. So Jen makes, she can do low carb cakes. She uses almond flour and a little bit of stevia and double cream whisked up with fresh raspberries and a tiny dot of vanilla. And I think that's what we do, Jen?
At Easter we do games or
Yeah.
making things or
Yeah. So we try and do experiences. Yeah, yeah, Jen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we always try and do non-food treats, and actually what kids love most is time with you or fun or games. And so obviously we do Easter hunts, but it doesn't involve finding chocolate, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and they now, because it's what we've done, they don't expect anything else. And the oldest of them is still doing it, and she's 13.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're coming on. Now, they know, obviously, when they go to other families, different things happen. But as long as you can do a decent cake that really people enjoy, and Jen can do a trifle, it's fine. But a great question. Maybe one more.
Which I don't
Oh,
eat,
Jen.
by the way.
What?
that's a story for so which I don't eat. I make it, but I don't eat it. But that's a story for after lunch.
Last question. Do you know, I'm going to go right to the back. I'll do 2 questions because we've got to be fair. I just think nobody ever talks to the back row. So you can do yours first, and the lady in lovely blue gets the last question. And then we can all go outside.
Okay, does that work?
Not really. Shout it out.
I can shout it out. So, as I spoke to you earlier, I'm vegan.
No.
But I completely. Sorry, I think everyone can hear me. It's what you have lungs for.
There you go. So I completely get where food comes into the mixture, and for some people that doesn't always work in the sense of having meat. I'm not particularly against people eating meat. I have a raw food fed dog, and she's allowed to catch her own and eat it. I just choose not to, but we have a good balance between the two of us. My question is, when you're dealing with patients, and I'm trying to get them to see that they're poisoning themselves ongoingly, and like training their children to eat sweet things because it's a treat. So they're already completely sugar addicted before they get to teenage stage.
I agree.
Like, how do you unwind those years where they know not only mentally but physically, emotionally, and within their own knowing how to operate in a different world?
You've touched on a vital thing, and that's why Jen is here, because I find that many people by the age of 15, they're on energy drinks, and the way they live and the way their friends live and the problems they have are massive, and it's very complicated. But I never give in, and Jen will talk more, and I've had some spectacular successes, but you very often have to deal with the whole family. You can't pick one person out of a family. So we very often, that's why we run groups. So we do group consultations, bring grandma, bring whoever cooks and shops, and try and do it as a group. But an excellent question. The lady in blue gets the last question.
I'll try and shout.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to know your thoughts on the relationship between ADHD and gut health. So I
Wow.
work with a lot of clients who I'm beginning to feel as though the whole world is potentially ADHD. And I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean it literally. Do you believe there is a direct relationship between leaky gut and ADHD?
That's a great question. The first thing to point out is that I have expertise, but it's in diabetes. And so I'm now speaking very much as a generalist because I'm not an expert in ADHD. I have come to believe that gut health is very important. I have come to believe that leaky gut is a really worrying thing. And when that starts, then proteins can leak across that shouldn't. And then you can become allergic to that. And you know, then you've got your body is starting, that's autoimmunity, that's how it starts. So I have come to believe that to be true. And I've seen many, many people who've improved it. The ADHD thing is so complicated because, I think diet is probably a really important part, but there's so many other things. When I watch mothers that bring in kids with ADHD, they're often on a screen in the waiting room, and then they have to be told to put the screen down while the doctor talks to them. But the mother's on a screen as well. And I think the young people that are outside now running around, that's what should happen. That's the hard wiring. And I think society is going wrong in so many ways. Diet is part of it, but there are others. And I think some of our children are symptomatic of some errors that we're making, and diet is one, but exercise and going outside is another.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
So, I was a mother who was diagnosed with fibromyalgia.
Yes.
And I learned latterly that you're not supposed to breastfeed a child if you have autoimmunity, because you're just passing that on to the child and destroying your own baby's gut health, if you like. Which I'm wondering if that's where the ADHD can come from. I hear you about the lifestyle stuff.
Yeah. The
But
truth.
there's a very real personality difference in a child with ADHD. They are the child that's on that bouncy castle and doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Are you with me?
Yes, I am.
And where attention is a real issue, yeah?
Yes.
But I would love to know how anyone is diagnosed with ADHD and successfully avoids all drugs.
Again, I've got cases, so I'm very much a generalist for this, but I've seen some amazing cases of ADHD who've gone keto, and I can remember one girl, I can't give it too specifically, but she couldn't sit down in the consulting room for a moment. So we used to have to allow her to just trash my room as she went round in circles, touching, like this. And it only took I know what it was. Her mother had diabetes. So her mother went on my diet, but the kid had to as well. And then one time she came crying because she said, watch her. And she did nothing. She just sat. And in that case, the diet had sorted out that kid, and it went really well. And I've got others, but I'm not an expert on ADHD. I really am on diabetes. Thank you. Again, you've all suffered enough. Go outside. Thank you, thank you. Oh, no, you can't. Bill's coming.
Thank you, David, so much. Brilliant. Absolutely.